I'm Elaine Reyes at the United Nations headquarters in New York, and this is UN Insider.
Coming up, desperate calls to increase humanitarian aid in Gaza as the conflict enters a 10th month.
Hospitals have special protection under international humanitarian law.
An emergency meeting on the fighting in Ukraine after missiles strike a children's hospital in Kyiv. Several Caribbean nations starting the recovery process after the second named storm of what could be a busy hurricane season. A look at the impact on tourism and development. Next.
Tourism is one of the biggest economic drivers in the world. The industry took a major hit when COVID-19 began to spread, but it is on the rebound. This year, tourism is expected to finally return to pre-pandemic levels. In this edition of UN Insider, we'll take a look at the state of the industry and the increased emphasis on sustainable tourism. But first, let's take a look at some of the big stories on the UN's agenda this week.
It's a vicious circle of not having access to enough of food, to clean water, to clean sanitation, not having access to basic health services.
UN officials are calling on the international community to prioritize the delivery of humanitarian aid in Gaza. Health officials say famine has spread throughout the enclave. They warn everyone in Gaza is at risk amid soaring temperatures, hunger, and the spread of diseases due to unsanitary conditions. The UN peacekeeping mission in the Democratic Republic of the Congo is pausing its withdrawal amid escalating regional tensions. Officials say the security situation in the eastern part of the country has reached alarming levels. Violence has risen since rebels launched attacks in late 2021. More than 7 million people have been displaced. A 2-week humanitarian truce is in place, and members of the Security Council voiced support for ongoing regional peace efforts.
China urges all armed groups located in the DRC to lay down weapons and withdraw from occupied areas immediately.
UN officials are calling for independent investigations of 2 deadly blasts in Ukraine, including one that struck the country's largest children's hospital. It happened during a massive daytime barrage, killing dozens of people throughout the country. The strike prompted an emergency session of the Security Council. Jody Jacobs has the details.
It was a tense UN Security Council meeting on Tuesday. Russia currently holds the rotating presidency of the Council, as well as being a party to the conflict. The Council convened an urgent meeting following the missile attacks on Monday that killed several dozen people. Russia's permanent representative telling the Council that it does not deliberately target civilians and civilian objects in Ukraine.
I hope now you can understand that no matter how the Kiev regime and its Western sponsors tried to represent the tragedy as a result of an intentional Russian strike, even in the eyes of regular Ukrainians, the version does not hold water. In these conditions, we really regret that the Council has been drawn into this dirty propaganda campaign of Kiev. If this had been a Russian strike, there would have been nothing left of the building, and all the children and most of the adults would have been killed and not wounded.
But Ukraine offered a different version of events.
At least 47 people were killed and more than 190 were wounded following yesterday's strike. I recall clear footage of the Russian missile approaching the hospital, the scale of the destruction, and the eyewitness accounts.
Council members on Tuesday called for an independent investigation into the incident, with some reiterating the call for the fighting to end.
There are no winners in conflict and confrontation, and military means will not bring lasting peace. President Xi Jinping, during his recent meeting with a foreign leader, stressed that, and that an early ceasefire and a political settlement are in the interest of all parties, adding that the priority is to de-escalate the situation.
The United Nations has once again called on all parties to the conflict to adhere to international law. It reminded council members that hospitals have special protection and any intentional attack against a hospital is a war crime and that the perpetrators must be held to account. Jody Jacobs, CGTN, New York.
Shudija is monitoring the latest developments inside the halls of the UN. Deja.
Yes, Elaine. This week, one of the focus was obviously Ukraine conflict. Well, first, the attack of Ukraine's biggest children's hospital quickly drew the attention of the international community. On the same day, UN Secretary General put out a swift statement condemning Monday attacks, including this particular incident.
The strike reportedly killed dozens of civilians, including children, and injured over 150 more. The incidents in which missiles hit the Okhmadit National Children's Specialized Hospital in Kyiv, which is the largest pediatric facility in Ukraine, and another medical facility in Kyiv, are particularly shocking.
Also on Thursday, UN General Assembly took action on the draft resolution named Safety and Security of Nuclear Facilities of Ukraine, including the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. The resolution is basically condemning Russia's occupation, including the nuclear facilities, and calling upon Russia to return the control of Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant to Ukraine.
Draft Resolution A/78/L90 is adopted.
China abstained, and here is what permanent representative of China to the United Nations, Ambassador Fu Cong, had to say about China's vote.
This draft resolution just submitted for a vote does not highlight the urgent need to promote dialogue and negotiations and seek a political solution. Nor does it emphasize the need to fundamentally resolve the fundamental security problem in Europe and to build a balanced, effective, and sustainable security architecture. Given the gap and the distance between the draft and China's consistent positions, we have no choice but to abstain from voting.
This week, another huge event here in the UN headquarters is the High-Level Political Forum on Sustainable Development, or what we call HLPF. This year, the theme is reinforcing the 2030 Agenda and eradicating poverty in times of multiple crises. The effective delivery of sustainable, resilient, and innovative solutions. The forum is going to conclude next week. According to GA resolution, the meetings shall result in a negotiated ministerial declaration for inclusion in the report of the Economic and Social Council to the General Assembly.
You all know that unfortunately, we are not on track to achieve the SDGs by 2030, which was our work plan, our promise as member states, international community. And then I think right now what the PJ is looking for, he's seeking is really a push for action.
This Thursday, UN Department of Economic and Social Affairs Population Division launched its World Population Prospects 2024 report. Here are some interesting key findings. The world's population is expected to continue growing over the coming 50 or 60 years, reaching a peak of around 10.3 billion people in the mid-2080s. But 1 in 4 people globally already lives in a country whose population has already peaked in size. And the report also said women today bear 1 child fewer than average than they did around 1990. And globally, life expectancy at birth reached 73.3 years in 2024, an increase of 8.4 years since 1995. It also reveals that by 2080, persons aged 65 or older will outnumber children under 18. And what does that mean for the world?
A global aging society, and that probably will happen even before this. So what would be the impact?
So first recommendation, it has fiscal challenges, labor market challenges, and health challenges. So we have been recommending to governments to look at all policy implications and start planning now. How will you handle with the aging population?
And that's all from me for this week.
Coming up.
For tourism, clearly this is going to be a major impact, particularly on those smaller islands.
UN Insider.
Communities across the Caribbean are recovering and rebuilding after Hurricane Beryl. UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres has released $4 million for relief efforts. The powerful storm wreaked havoc, making history as the Atlantic Ocean's strongest June hurricane ever. The storm also dealt an economic blow to countries that rely heavily on tourism dollars.
For tourism, clearly this is going to be a major impact, particularly on those smaller islands in the Grenadines and in the north of Grenada. Fortunately, major infrastructure such as airports and ports weren't hugely damaged, and hopefully tourists won't give up on visiting these lovely islands.
But warm waters and a forecast for an active season could present more challenges, testing the resilience of some small island developing states.
This is only the start of hurricane season, and therefore we really need to be working towards putting systems in place to ensure that there's an element of resilience built into this.
I recently sat down with Jamaica's UN ambassador, Brian Wallace, to discuss preparing for strong storms while also investing in tourism. This interview occurred before Hurricane Beryl formed.
Ambassador, thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, absolutely, my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Jamaica is well represented when it comes to the UN's disaster risk reduction department. Experts are already saying that this year's Atlantic hurricane season will be very active.
You know, at the end of April this year, I saw the National Meteorological Service in Jamaica announce that they were watching a system that had formed off the coast of Africa, which is where our hurricanes develop from. This was at the end of April. Our hurricane season starts in June. So to have these kinds of warning signals emanating from so early really does require the kind of response to prepare. But the goal of reducing the intensity of hurricanes, reducing the impact of climate change is ultimately what is going to save us. In the meantime, we have to build our resilience. We have to adapt. That also requires the means to do that. And again, it takes us back to the means of implementation for everything. How do you create the channels of financing to allow you to build and adapt and prepare, and then to recover when it happens? Multifaceted challenges that we face in this regard. Jamaica has been smart, been sensible in taking an approach to building the resilience, but also to preparing for the worst.
Tourism in your country is booming. $1.27 billion just in the first quarter of this year, and it looks like that's only the beginning. People are drawn to your gorgeous beaches and your green spaces. Are there any concerns at all, or is it full steam ahead for your tourism industry?
Well, tourism is of critical importance to Jamaica's development prospects. We have been blessed with a beautiful country, with a people who are warm and hospitable, and if I may say, vibesy. And so the ability to use this industry as a tool for our development is something that the government has embraced. We have a Minister of Tourism who is recognized globally. In fact, he was just recognized as a global icon for tourism, and who is driving the development of the tourism industry in a way that is sustainable and that is resilient. This is one of the reasons why just last year, Jamaica led the process towards the commemoration of February 17 as Global Tourism Resilience Day. Because the COVID-19 experience taught us that the global tourism industry is subject to shocks. The pandemic was a shock. It's also subject to political shocks, to economic shocks, to natural disaster shocks. And so because it is so intertwined, and because it's such a conduit for relationships with other states, with other cultures, with other peoples, it is important for us to have a healthy global economy, one that can withstand these shocks. And so we work very hard, not just to develop our own tourism industry and to welcome as many as we can accommodate into our homes and to develop the infrastructure sustainably to do that. But we also try to share the experience that we've had with this effort with partners across the globe. We are pressing for greater investment in our tourism industry in a way that protects and preserves not just the environment, but the capacity of our own people to enjoy the bounties of our country. We're very pleased with the progress that we've been able to make, especially since the pandemic, to recover so quickly and to continue our growth path. But we still have some more targets that we need to hit, and we're working very hard towards achieving those.
You mentioned building a more resilient tourism sector, and part of that I know includes investing in the communities, investing in education. What were some of those lessons learned post-pandemic that you would want to share with countries that are also trying to build their tourism industry?
Well, you know, the lesson is that you can't wait to make these investments. Because if we are constantly in the waiting game to earn enough to be able to invest, then you will always be behind, and your people will get left behind when there is an exogenous shock like the pandemic. And so finding the wherewithal to be able to prioritize investments in health and in education, which were exposed dramatically during the pandemic, is critical. It's one of the reasons why another one of our priorities as a country and as a government is to press for appropriate financing for development so that those fiscal gaps can be closed and that fiscal space can open up for us to be able to invest in these areas.
Ambassador Brian Wallace, thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Coming up.
The question is really one for the traveler. Is the traveler willing to spend a few extra dollars to offset their carbon footprint?
UN Insider.
All you need to know about China. China 24, only on CGTN.
What does sustainable tourism look like? Francis Coe takes us to a city where sustainability is always a focus.
With views like this, you might say Mother Nature is Vancouver's unofficial ambassador. About 11 million tourists visit Vancouver every year, and the biggest attractions center on the city's natural beauty. The crown jewel, Stanley Park, with the world's longest uninterrupted waterfront path, a haven for cyclists and pedestrians. The 400-hectare green oasis shaded by 500,000 trees. Another draw, the Capilano Suspension Bridge, stretching 140 meters and hovering 70 heart-stopping meters above the Capilano River.
Look around you. We're nestled in the heart of downtown Vancouver against a backdrop of the beautiful British Columbia mountains and oceanfront.
Those in the tourism business know Vancouver's big selling point is its scenery, and they've taken great pains to show visitors how they're protecting it.
We take a lot of pride in it.
The Vancouver Convention Center has a prime spot to welcome out-of-towners. The reverence to the environment isn't window dressing.
Instead of building a convention center and trying to make it sustainable, it is actually integrated into every aspect. It's in every part of our fabric.
Quite literally, when the 100,000 square meters of the center's west building was completed in 2009, it solidified itself as one of the world's most sustainable convention facilities. That core foundation reflected in the walls, comprised of 1 million pieces of wood from sustainably managed forests in British Columbia. The center's kitchen uses locally sustainably sourced food.
It's a core of my profession and my passion. Juice the beet, add some sugar to it and some maple syrup to it.
Many of the ingredients come from the Green Roof, home to more than 400,000 indigenous plants, providing a natural habitat for animals and a natural cooling system for the building.
This is where most of the biological activity happens, where the bacteria will break down the sewage.
And at the bottom, an on-site wastewater treatment plant whose sophisticated system recycles wastewater back into the toilets and rooftop irrigation system.
This is what the water looks like coming in. The middle one is what the water looks like coming out of our membrane tanks. And the last one is after we add a little bit of chlorine.
How much comes in here?
I'd say on average, we're looking around 90 cubic meters, so 90,000 liters a day, and around 2 million liters a month.
Across the way, a different view of the waterfront, but the same vision.
We have noticed since the past few years that people are really looking for sustainability, and they don't want you to just say you're sustainable, they want numbers. People want to leave less of a carbon footprint, and they want to feel good about traveling.
The hotel created quite the buzz in 2008 when it became one of the first hotels to introduce rooftop hives, home to 250,000 native bees.
I'm completely connected to them.
Lovingly tended to by Chief Beekeeper Julia Common.
Like this? Yeah, and under your bill. Yep. You'll taste a bit of a savory taste, which is the pollen, fermented bee bread, and that's total protein. It's like a steak.
The bees produce 90 kilograms of honey a year, a treasure trove for the hotel's sustainably minded chefs.
We wouldn't have so many types of foods that grow because of the pollination of bees. Honey lavender macaroons, rooftop honey truffle, and one of my favorites is to serve honey with cheese. I think it's just a classic pairing, and it's absolutely beautiful.
That's really nice. The Fairmont Hotel's model helped propel Vancouver to an important distinction: the city with the most sustainable hotels in the world. Here, putting Vancouver's best face forward, almost second nature.
Being in nature is such a big part of who we are.
Frances Coe, CGTN, Vancouver, British Columbia, Canada.
Technology and innovation can be key to finding sustainable solutions. Alex Manns is the CEO of Flyer, a platform that uses AI to modernize the travel industry. Alex, how does AI and technology make travel more sustainable?
That's a great question. So if I look at Flyer side of the equation, we help airlines better forecast demand, which in turn allows them to determine what aircraft should I put on a route. So instead of putting too big of an aircraft on a route that is not fully populated in terms of demand, they can downgauge to a smaller aircraft and save fuel, or vice versa. Instead of flying 2 planes, they can fly 1 larger plane. So we help them forecast demand and optimize that capacity planning. Outside of our realm, airlines are very much shifting to a sustainable aviation fuel. I think the biggest challenge in that realm right now is manufacturing and the price of sustainable aviation fuel. But there too, AI is trying to help determine what is the mix of normal fuel and SAF, sustainable aviation fuel, I should combine on different routes to still make a profit while reducing my effective carbon footprint.
There are, reports that say that 2024 travel will surpass pre-pandemic levels. Is that what you're seeing out there, and what's the sentiment among people?
Absolutely. I definitely think that some of the post-COVID revenge travel has kind of subsided, but overall demand for travel is higher than it's ever been. I think the world is more connected than it's ever been. There is definitely a higher percentage of leisure travelers in the market now than there is business travelers. So for example, business class cabins are more leisure than they were before in terms of percentage of occupation. So we're seeing a shift in who is traveling and why, but overall we're continuing to see growth. Overall travel and passenger volume on airlines will increase by about 50%, 50, in the next 6 to 7 years globally.
I don't see how that's possible because flights are already full. It's crazy.
Yeah, we're definitely seeing that in up and coming markets. So Latin America, Asia, Africa, those are growth markets where a lot of the population that wasn't traveling by airplane before is now starting to commute or travel by airplane. So there's a lot of growth coming from there. But even the North American market is growing quite materially.
When it comes to technology in the travel industry, you mentioned some regions. What are regions that have been quick to embrace AI technology, and what are some regions that are still hesitant, have some concerns, slow to go?
Yeah, so the regions where competition and growth of travel demand are the most rapid tend to be the ones that innovate more, especially in Asia, Africa, Latin America, and parts of the Middle East. You have a very large, young, natively digital population. They were born on their phone, they do everything on their phone. Countries like Saudi Arabia, right? It's got the youngest population in the Middle East. Everybody has an iPhone. That tends to be the region or the regions where innovation is kind of front and center, where AI for trip planning, for forecasting is becoming much quicker in terms of adoption than, say, North America or Europe, where you have larger or legacy players that move slower on innovation.
In some of those areas that have rainforests and beaches, do you see a rise in sustainable tourism or tourism that has like an eco focus, for example?
Yeah, you're definitely starting to see it. I will say that there seems to be a bit of a gap between what people say they want and what they're willing to pay for. Because the reality of the airline industry is that the consumer, the traveler, will happily spend a small fortune on their hotel or their eco lodge, but they're not willing to spend on the flight to get there. So the airlines are running in a world where they have very low margin because the traveler doesn't want to pay them a premium. So I think the challenge is the travelers want to be eco-conscious, but they're not willing to pay the guys that are actually having the biggest impact on carbon footprint to get to those destinations. So less than 3% of travelers actually checks the box to offset their carbon footprint, to give you a sense of how many people actually are willing to pay up for saving on their carbon footprint. So that's a bit of a conflict that exists between the travelers and the travel suppliers. But airlines are trying to do their job. They're trying to use more sustainable aviation fuel. They're trying to use more efficient, modern planes. But at the end of the day, the question is really one for the traveler. Is the traveler willing to spend a few extra dollars to offset their carbon footprint? If the answer is no, the airlines do not have enough margin to actually pay for the traveler to offset that footprint. So that's a bit of a challenge.
What's the one thing that you would tell companies or just regular people when it comes to new technology and AI? Would you say, don't be afraid, embrace it? Because there are so many negative connotations that you hear out there.
Yeah, I would say definitely embrace it. Like companies that do not implement or start leveraging AI to be better at what they do will fall behind, but be practical, right? Use it in places where your consumer actually is helped, your customer is helped by the way you apply AI. Do it in ways that actually help you improve your revenue or reduce your cost or help you gain the capability travelers and customers want. I think there's a lot of hype around AI. I think there's a lot of misuse of AI. Just be practical. Like be practical in how and where you deploy it, and do it for the purpose of your customer.
Alex, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Elaine.
I'm Elaine Reyes at UN headquarters in New York. Thanks for being a UN Insider.